All right. Thank you for tuning in to CITR 101.9 FM. You're listening to Democracy Watch. We're starting about 20 minutes early today. Democracy Watch is the News Collective's weekly, hour-long, in this case, hour and 20 minutes long, alternative and undercovered current affairs show. We cover Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. And my name is Alex DeBoer, and I'm joined here with...
Hina Imam.
Yeah, and it's Thursday, February 14th. Nothing remarkable about today. It's 4:40. Yeah, 4:40 p.m. exactly right now, and we're broadcasting from UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. So today, first up on the show, is a story on BC's first Open Mosque Day. So reporter Hina Imam, who I'm in the studio with now, will be talking with Mosque Day program manager Adnan Akil, who has joined us over the phone. Hello, Hina and Adnan. Can you hear us,
Hi.
Adnan?
Hi. How you guys doing?
Good.
Hi.
How are you
We're
today?
good.
I am doing very well. And though you said it's not a remarkable Thursday, it is. It didn't snow this morning, so I was very happy about it. And that was something remarkable because I live in Richmond and I drive up to Coquitlam every day. And the day it doesn't snow is a remarkable day.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll take that.
Taking the silver lining.
I'm okay with that being what today's about, you know? That's okay. It didn't snow today. Although, actually, it's snowing here, I think, in Vancouver at UBC. But it tends to be a little bit colder here than the rest of the city, so...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, okay. So thank you so much for joining us today, Adnan.
Thank you for having me.
So, the Open Mosque Day event, which is happening on Saturday, February 16th. Can you start by telling our audience what this Open Mosque Day is about?
Yes, 100%. Now, mosques globally are always open to everyone. Anyone can visit the mosque. Most mosques are open pretty much all day. However, in the recent past, we have noticed that there has been a lot of misconceptions when it comes to Islam and Muslims. A lot of fear when it comes to sometimes even the presence of Muslims around people. And as such, this puts our event, the Open Mosque Day, in a special position whereby by us opening our doors to members of the wider community, kind of showcase that openness and an attempt at bridging the gap between Muslims and non-Muslims by hopefully engaging everyone into a positive, constructive discourse. So the idea behind this event is that major mosques all across BC in about 9 will be opening up their doors to members of the general public on the same day, during the same time. Anyone and everyone, regardless of their faith, gender, orientation, race,
Right.
social class, everyone is welcomed, and people can engage in a conversation. They can hang around. They can, check the mosque, see what happens at a mosque, and just kind of build friendships.
That sounds really promising. So, okay, what is your role with this event?
I'm the program manager. Essentially, my role entails coordinating the event in all the different cities to make sure every mosque offers uniform services when it comes to the open mosque, because people can visit the mosque at any day. However, certain features that we have included in our event would not be available on just about any day. For example, every mosque is setting up an exhibition, on different themes.
Oh, wow.
That cover topics like, what do actually Muslims actually believe in? Is anti-Muslim bigotry or Islamophobia real?
Right.
Or things like women in Islam. So we have an exhibition on these items. We've included some fun activities like, hijab tryouts for women, for them to kind of, wear the hijab, take some pictures, have a good time. We have included activities like henna tattooing.
That's fun.
Yeah, that seems to be something that the kids enjoy a lot.
Mm,
We have a lot of really good refreshments and food. So just to kind of break the ice, let people socialize,
okay.
and just genuinely bond with each other.
Mm-hmm. So this is the first time such an event is happening here in BC on such a large scale, right? So and that is really exciting. So where did the inspiration for organizing such an event come from, and has something similar happened in other countries? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the inspiration comes from a sense of responsibility
Mm-hmm.
that me and my team have for the people around us. Something that has motivated me in life the most is a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who said, talking to Muslims, he said, "None of you truly believe, that is, none of you will have complete faith until you love for others what you love for yourself."
Right.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so this has really motivated me in life to do all that I do. So I genuinely love connecting with people,
Mm-hmm.
understanding people, building my emotional intelligence and empathy within me. So when
Mm-hmm.
we engage in activities like these, it is very fulfilling in the sense that we know we are working towards a greater cause of making our society stronger, making it making the strength of coexistence stronger, and just sharing knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and sharing experience. So that is the inspiration behind it. And once we organized open mosque days in individual mosques independently, we practically saw the results of it. We see how much people appreciate it,
Okay.
connecting with each other. So
Huh.
that's how it grew. Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks for sharing that beautiful quote. So, I'm wondering about this event. That was it sort of an individual's idea, or was it community led that something like this should be done in BC?
It's always a team effort.
Uh huh.
It's always a team effort. It's always something something that is initiated and it organically grows, that you can't necessarily pinpoint to one specific moment. Hey, this is what led to it. So it was very organically built up, and people within the Muslim communities have been working independently, and they've been all doing such a good job that our individual efforts collectively led us to the moment where we all sort of decided, what, we really need to, unite when it comes to showcasing
Right.
our concern for the wider society and our concern for making sure
Yeah.
that we build a stronger country and a stronger province.
Yeah, and especially in these times that we're living in, something like this is so much needed. So I was looking at Stats Canada, and they released this report in 2017, which showed alarming numbers of police reported hate crimes, and yeah, it was in 2017, and they were largely driven by incidents targeting Muslim community, Jewish community, and African Canadian people. So, according to you, and after listening to these stats, like, what do you feel are the main challenges faced by the Muslim community, perhaps Muslim community in BC?
Um, yeah, no, I think I've come across similar stats.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reports published by Stats Canada showed that between 2012 and 2015, hate crimes against Muslims increased by 253%, and that is between 2012 and 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Now, now,
Yeah.
now, these numbers kind of bring the issue on surface. So we realize that there is a problem, and the problem, in my opinion, is a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding, and a lack of effort.
Okay.
An individual puts in
Huh.
to get to know one another. Something that I would really like to mention here is that if you think about it, everyone has an opinion about Islam,
Mm-hmm.
or at least a feeling towards Islam. Whether we know about it, whether we know what Islam is, whether we have Muslim friends or not, regardless of that, everyone tends to have an opinion about Islam, and what we essentially want is for everyone to have an informed and an educated opinion about Islam.
And what would you say? So you said everyone tends to have an opinion, and what do you think that opinion usually is?
Um, it varies. I mean, I hate generalizing because I don't necessarily have, academic research done on this.
Right.
But I can tell you from an informal survey that I personally did in downtown
Yeah,
Kelowna
please.
back in 2015. We had a very small sample size. It was a very informal survey. Most
Okay.
individuals had either a neutral view about Islam in general or had a negative view about the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So there were these two balances. It wasn't the opinion about Islam wasn't towards a positive side. It was neutral or it was negative. And everyone who indicated a negative opinion about Islam, we found out that those were the same individuals who pointed out that they've not had many Muslim friends.
Huh. That is
So
really interesting.
yeah, so it is very rational. You can find the rationality in our informal survey. But the problem doesn't necessarily lie on members of the non-Muslim community. I do put the blame on Muslims as well, because
Okay.
when faced with misconceptions or certain negative sentiments about Islam and Muslims, in most cases, Muslims fall into a narrative of disassociation, whereby they disassociate themselves from certain actions and certain things. And in
Right.
that process, they tell people who they are not, rather than telling people who they actually are.
That is so true.
So we are not terrorists, we're not bad people. So who actually are you? So they miss the point there.
Huh.
And with this event, essentially, we want to tell people who we are and not just who we are not. Does that make sense?
It really does. Yeah, thanks. This was my next question, which you answered. So, yeah, I was just going to ask what you're hoping to achieve with Open Mass Day, and we talked about negative opinions and sort of how do you think it will help negate stereotypes?
Yeah, the way the event is set up, people can visit anytime they want, stay for as long as they want. We don't want to create an event whereby people come in, they sit down, there's a presentation, like Q&A, and people leave. That's not the idea. The way we want to go about the Open Mosque Day. We want people to feel free. Hang around the mosque in a way they like, interact with as many people as they like, ask whatever question they may have, share concerns. One thing that I always encourage people to do is, as you meet different people, Muslim communities are very diverse. You have people from,
For
Asian
sure.
backgrounds, European backgrounds, Middle Eastern backgrounds. The Muslim community is very diverse. And to walk up to different people, different Muslims, and asking them how their faith affects them. Like, how does their faith affect their lifestyle? How does their faith affect their relationship with the people around them? And seeing the diversity in those answers is very interesting. Personally, I find it very interesting when I ask such questions to different Muslims. So I would encourage people to do that and realize how unifying Islam can be, despite maintaining everyone's subjectivity and individuality. So I think people would generally, find the event informative, fun, and genuine.
And can you also share the timings on Saturday?
It is 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Saturday, 16th of February,
Okay.
is the Family Day long weekend. The
Also,
event
reading
is.
break, yeah, for a lot of
Oh,
university students.
yeah, I have been out of university for a while, so I have no idea about reading break.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I don't get to have the good stuff.
So, thanks so much for talking to us. This was really informative, and I wish you all the best with your event.
Thank you very much. Just to kind of mention for your
Mm-hmm.
for your listeners, if anyone is interested, they can always go to our website www.openmosquebc.ca, find the locations of the different mosques. So that's a good resource to kind of use.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thanks for sharing that.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
And you're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We will be right back after this short break. Stay tuned.
No tears to cry. Is it better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all? The vampires won't love you if you don't let them in. The vampires can't hurt you if you don't let them in. The vampire. Thank you.
Hello, welcome back to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We did an extra segment at the top of the show that began at 4:40. So if you tuned into that, lucky you. We had Hina, one of the News Collective members, interviewing Adnan Khalil. Hina, do you want to just summarize what your conversation was?
Yeah, sure. So the Open Mosque Day event is happening in BC for the first time on this Saturday, and what my conversation with Adnan was, and it's mostly about bridging the gap between the Muslim community and the non-Muslim community, and
Right.
sort of to negate stereotypes and just have an open and honest dialogue, I would say.
Yeah. An opportunity to check out some mosques in BC and have some food and learn a bit about the religion and the community. And where can they learn more about this, I guess? So
It's just you can Google Open Mosque Day BC, and you'll get the list of mosques in different areas. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. There are exhibitions happening as well, and you can get henna tattoos, so that's fun.
Sweet. Cool. Thanks, Hina. And I'm also joined in studio by
Zoe Power.
Zoe
That's me.
Power,
Here I am.
classic news comrade. the great and powerful Zoe.
It's a pleasure to be on
Oh,
your
thanks for
airwaves,
being here.
listeners.
You are a delight. That was not sarcastic. So it's February 14th. It's 5 p.m. on the dot.
On the dot.
On the dot. And we're broadcasting from Vancouver's UBC's Vancouver campus on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. So we had an interview that started out the show a little bit early, as I just said, and we're now going to turn to housing in Vancouver. Shocking. We never cover housing. And we're going to talk a bit about Rental 100, which is a incentive program that the Government of Vancouver implemented. It started as a pilot program in 2009. I'm going to talk a bit more about this, but we're going to talk about this program that incentivizes the building of rental housing. And something we noticed in the renter advocacy community is that, not that it's a solid community by any means, or that they share necessarily political values, and this really highlights that often people don't. But there's a lot of people who want to see renters in the city be able to live here, and they want to see more housing built, and they want the city to be more livable. But the way of getting there, the opinion on how we get there is vastly different. Yeah, Zoe, do you want to add anything to this before I introduce the two speakers that I interviewed?
Yeah, only to say that I guess amidst all of the differences in opinion about how to solve Vancouver's ongoing forever housing crisis, the reason that this week has been a particularly big week in that regard is that there's two things going on at City Hall at the moment. One of those is a council motion to actually make changes to the Rental 100 Act itself. That was something that was brought forward by Adrian Carr, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about the changes that will be involved in that bill. But it would be essentially a move to stop incentivizing the building of rental stock accommodation full stop, and to actually put some barriers on what qualifies as affordable within that, so that only certain types of rental stock would be incentivized.
Right. So this motion put forward by Adrian Carr, which passed yesterday in council, does it actually have specific changes, or does it just talk about, does it just ask staff to review Rental 100 and recommend changes to make? It's the second. Yeah. So, yeah, that was my understanding. So this motion, it's to look at a number of housing programs, not just Rental 100, but this is the one we're focusing on today. Yeah, to look at how it can be made better, to put it like super vaguely. And for Adrian Carr, we know from interviewing her a couple weeks ago that affordability is a key issue for her, because the cost of renting units under the Rental 100 program is actually not very affordable. Average one bedroom is like $1,500, $1,600. Two bedroom, it's like $2,500. So it's actually higher than the median average in the city.
Yeah, for people who've read any of the sort of multiple articles that have come out over the last year at least about sort of the shockingly high rates which have been classed as affordable in new housing developments across the city of Vancouver. You've probably seen at least one of these articles about sort of a 3-bedroom apartment for $4,000 being classed affordable. This is the definition which is currently being used in the Rental 100 Act. So that's why there's a push to change it, because that is obviously not in line with what most people would consider to be affordable housing and good affordability policy in the city of Vancouver. So that's one thing that was happening with Rental 100 this week at City Hall. And the second thing, so apart from a push to change the actual fabric of like what Rental 100 is and does, is that two particular properties two particular new developments which have been sort of put forward under the existing policy were up for debate in council at City Hall this week.
Yeah.
And Alex was live streaming all of the action as these were being debated.
Minute.
Can you tell us about
the
fray?
Yeah, there was a property on 4th which is basically where the Salvation Army is on 4th and Burrard. It used to be a radio station, apparently, so...
It's a great Salvation
Tier.
Army. They're like open very late.
I know.
Till like 10 p.m.
I think there's 2 people who live in the bottom or something, but there's not a lot of tenants, so that one wasn't super contentious in terms of like the public speaking against it. Most people were in favor with like slight concerns like, is it going to make the intersection nearby more busier? But the one that was really interesting and contentious was the redevelopment at 815 Commercial Drive. Currently, the rental property there, there's like a house and like a back house, or there's like a few actual places where people are living in. According to Sarah Sagai of the VTU, who was doing outreach there, I think she said there were more than 20 people actually living there. So it's actually quite a few tenants. And this has been... the owners of this property have submitted it to the city for redevelopment under the Rental 100 program. So if they follow the rules under the Rental 100 program, then they get the DCL fees waived. So that means they get like a bit of a break, right? It's an incentive program. And so people were speaking for and against this program, and it really highlighted sort of a divide in terms of how housing advocates and renter advocates feel we're going to make the city more affordable. And we actually don't have a ton of time because the interviews I did ran really long. So I'm actually going to segue into the first interview I did.
That was a smooth segue.
Thank you so much. This interview is with someone named Karen Sawatsky. And Karen is a former Vancouver Renter Advisory Committee chair for the city of Vancouver, and she's a member of Abundant Housing, though she's not speaking on behalf of the organization. She's speaking for herself, and she was kind enough to take the time to talk with me. So let's go to that interview, and you can hear Karen's perspective on Rental 100. And then after that, we're going to go to an interview I did with Sarah Sagai, a steering committee member on the Vancouver Tenants Union, who has a different opinion on the program. So let's hear Karen. Here we go. Talk with me today. I was wondering if you could just start out by telling me who you are and what your connection is to renter and housing rights in Vancouver.
Sure. So just maybe I'll just say as an aside before I identify myself. So this is rental housing, big topic, right? And housing policy, a big topic. And so I'll try and be concise. I do tend to go on, but if you're going to be covering this issue, rental housing or housing policy, the Rental 100 program or something, be happy to have, coffee with you sometime or something like that if you wanted to talk about it in a more sort of expansive way,
sure.
if that would be useful to you. And I didn't get a chance to listen to the whole podcast, but I did listen to most of the podcasts that you did with Councillor Card.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. My name is Karen Sawatsky, and my relationship to, I guess, the housing issue is that I'm a renter in the city of Vancouver and have been a renter all my life. And I am the former chair of the city of Vancouver's Renters Advisory Committee, which was a body that advised council on rental policy. No longer exists, but that body existed for about 3 years, and I chaired it for the last year and a half of its existence. And I guess I have an academic interest as well, because I completed a degree in urban studies, a Master of Urban Studies at SFU, and sort of focused on housing in my coursework and research, and in particularly on the issue of short-term rentals.
Okay, great. Thanks. And can you tell me just briefly why you support Rental 100?
Because I support Rental 100 because we have very severe shortage of rental housing and have had for the last 30 years. And not having enough rental housing is, I think, the fundamental issue that really empowers landlords in relation to renters. And obviously, landlords are always going to have power over renters because they own the housing. But when housing is so scarce, it really gives it gives landlords a lot more scope and leverage against renters to maybe not follow good practices, landlord practices, and also to charge premiums for rental housing. So we really need a lot more rental housing. There's a huge demand for rental housing in Vancouver because of 30 years of basically not building any new purpose-built rental housing, and because we have an economy that's chugging along pretty well, and so we have new workers coming in. We have new people being born within our region, and then we have people coming to our region for all sorts of other reasons. And some of those want to buy, but there's a huge demand for rental housing, and when there's not enough of it, the people who are going to get the rental housing and the best rental housing are the people with the most money and the most social capital. That's what happens when anything is scarce, is that the people with the most money get the best access to that scarce item.
Okay.
So we need a lot more rental housing.
Okay. According to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, in the last 3 years, we've seen a substantial new supply added to our purpose-built rental market. And in 2018, Metro Vancouver's vacancy rate did rise very slightly. But simultaneously, average rents in Metro Vancouver went up by 6.2%. So it seems like the construction of purpose-built rental, as it's happening now, much of which in Vancouver is incentivized under Rental 100, is increasing average rent costs more than it's raising our vacancy rate. So what do you see as the solution to this?
Well, I don't agree with the premise of that whatsoever. First of all, say that we had a substantial increase. I mean, you've got to compare that to demand. I mean, you need to look at the vacancy rate. What is the vacancy rate? That's what measures how much rental housing we have in relation to the demand, and it's still under 1%. That hasn't changed. So, the amount of rental housing versus the amount of rental housing we need is measured by the vacancy rate. It's not just some, whole number that you say, oh, that's a lot of units. You have to compare it to the amount of units that are needed. And that's reflected in the vacancy rate. Obviously,
Right.
we don't have enough. Under 1% is not a healthy vacancy rate. Around 3 to 5% is a
Right.
healthy
So I
vacancy
did bring
rate.
up the change in vacancy rate. So you're saying that basically we just are not building enough rental.
Nowhere near enough rental.
Okay.
And we're not building enough for current demand, and we also have a 30-year backlog.
Right.
So of course, when something is so scarce, of course, the cost of it is going to be very high.
Okay. So right now, Rental 100 is not building enough rental.
We're not building enough rental, period. Rental 100 is one of the mechanisms, and probably the best mechanism that we have right now to encourage the supply of rental housing. So no, we obviously don't have enough. We look at the vacancy rate, and it's not Rental 100 that is increasing the cost of rental housing. It's the fact that we don't have enough.
Mm-hmm.
Rental 100 is not.
So what do you see? How do you see us building more rental housing?
Well, for one thing, we need to maintain the Rental 100 program, because if you look at the stats and the history, it's like when we finally started to actually build it, it's directly correlated to that program. So we need to maintain what's working, and then we probably need to do a whole bunch of other things to make rental housing building even more attractive, because developers do have an alternative, which is to build condos, and that's a much more attractive and financially appealing alternative to them, and that's why we need an incentive program, is to rebalance that. So we probably need to consider even more incentives to build rental housing, like relaxing parking requirements even further. We also need to expand the area where it's possible to build rental housing without going through a very long, expensive rezoning process. There's only a tiny percentage of, it's about 25% of the residential land in the city is available to build multifamily housing on, which is rental housing. So we just don't have enough area where we can even build the amount of housing that rental housing that we need. So that would be another thing. And then there's government programs like the GST on rental housing, that the federal Liberals said that they would take that off rental housing, and they didn't. So, you always need to look at it in terms of other alternatives, especially residential alternatives, that are appealing to developers to buy. It's a quicker return on their money. It's a bigger return on their money to build condos. So if we want them to build something else, we need to look at incentives. And
Right.
any policy program that doesn't look at that or account for that reality is going to fail, and it's going to show in the numbers that it's failed. It won't create units unless you take into account that reality.
Right. So you're basically like at City Hall on Tuesday during a public hearing on a couple redevelopment projects under Rental 100. The second one being at 815 Commercial Street. So we heard like what you mentioned, this kind of the two options in front of council, which are either developers build condos, which are inherently more expensive than renting a rental unit, or developers are incentivized by the city to build rental stock. And so like Sarah Sagai of the Vancouver Tenants Union identified that as a false binary. And so you're sort of saying those are the two options, but are there third options? Like what about rental only zoning, or like do you see that as the binary that we're being faced with, or is there something else we can do?
Well, you know, I'm not the one who presented that as a false binary. So if people think that there are alternatives, I'd like to know what they are. And I haven't, you know, so if they're saying rental only zoning is an alternative, I'm fully behind rental only zoning. I'd like to see that come in, and I'd like to use it. I'd like to see cities use that not only to preserve existing housing as rental housing, but to expand the area where rental housing could be built, so that we can, you know, again, we need more space to build the amount of rental housing we can build. So rental only zoning, I think, is a tool with a lot of promise, and I'm enthusiastic about it, but it doesn't, you know, that doesn't exist for this project right now that you're talking about. You know, the provincial government has enabled it, but it requires policy changes at the City of Vancouver to sort of, you know, so it's a new tool, and so, you know, some local governments are feeling cautious about how to use it, because for one thing, right now, if you have an existing property that allows for both condo and rental, and then you tell the owner that now it's only allowed for rental, you know, the owners are not going to be happy about that. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done because of that. I think that's a legitimate policy option for local governments to pursue, but you've got to realize that, you know, if you have an existing property where you can build both types of housing and one is a lot more lucrative, and then you take that option away, the city needs to, you know, think that through before they roll that out, right? So that option does not exist right now. So, you know, that's not an option for this property right now.
Right.
So that's one thing. So I don't know what other options they're talking about. You know, if you say, you know, that's a false binary, well, tell me what the other options are. If it's rental only zoning, well, that's great, but it doesn't exist. You know, it's not an option for this property right now. And if you're saying, well, you should just, you know, say no to this rental project because it's too expensive and wait until rental only zoning is in place, well, that doesn't work, because the owner of that property can just say, okay, you know, the existing zoning allows me to build a 4-story condo. I'll just do that instead. And I don't need to come back to you for any permission. So we'll lose any rental housing at all if we take that option. And then the other thing is, just because you have rental only zoning, you can't force people, developers, to build projects that don't make financial sense to them. The city, our society, actually needs rental housing a lot more than any one developer needs to. Like, developers can build condos, they can build commercial. They, you know, there's not that many developers that only build rental housing. They build a whole variety of things. So we, as a society, actually need the rental housing a lot more than the developers need to build it. And that's, I wish it wasn't that case. That sucks that it's the case. But policies need to acknowledge reality, you know, in order to make any difference or improve things. We can't just say it should be this way or I wish it was this way. Policies have to deal with realities even if we don't like them.
Right. So then, like when people criticize the rate, the rental rate, you know, caps under Rental 100, which are still quite high, you know, $2,500 or more for a 2-bedroom. You would say that if a developer or the owner of that property doesn't charge that amount for rent, then they wouldn't be able to make enough to make the profit to make the project profitable. Is that how you look at it?
You know, I'm not a rental developer. I'm not in the industry, but I've tried to learn, about some of the issues with building rental housing because I'm interested in the topic, and my objective is to see people housed and to end this housing and homelessness crisis because the rental crisis is very closely tied to homelessness. If there's not enough rental housing, that has a big effect in terms of our ability to solve homelessness. So, I have tried to learn about the challenges, the financial and construction challenges of building rental housing. And, developers, one thing I think that maybe people might not understand is like most developers are not building rental housing out of their own, piggy banks. They're going to banks and pension funds and stuff to finance that. And so in order to get that financing, they have to show that there will be a rate of return that is satisfactory to those investors. And so that's just, how it works. Most developers are not well financed enough to do that out of their own pockets. That's not how the business works. So, we have to deal with the realities of how rental housing is financed. These are big projects. They take place over years. There's risks. There's, doing, several, in some cases, several stories of underground parking or at least a few stories of underground parking, which is very expensive. And there's all sorts of, it's, so in terms of, an individual project, developers will make more or less of a return on different projects. And, again, it's not really something that the city government has control over. They can't force developers to build things that don't make financial sense to them.
Right. I mean, they could make that cap lower, though.
They could make the cap lower. I mean, in your interview with Councillor Carr, she's saying, we need to change these rates. It's like, well, you could change the bylaw and put whatever you want on it, and I guess pat yourself on the back for, writing a bylaw that has, the numbers in it that you think are should be in there and they're affordable. But you cannot, again, they can't make the developers go, yes, that makes sense for me to build that with those numbers. We have. It's pretty frustrating if people think that they, are going to, be rewriting a bylaw and to satisfy, what they think the numbers should be, and give themselves credit for that. The credit comes when the program works, as Rental 100 is building units to meet a terrible, terrible crisis in rental housing. And Rental 100 is something that has, built or, there's over the last 8 years or something like, 7,400 rental units were, are in the process. They're not all built, but they're approved and at some stage in construction. Those weren't all Rental 100 projects, but the vast majority of them were Rental 100 projects. So, would we be better off without those, 7,400 units that have been approved in the last 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing, though, is like trying to understand that it makes sense to me that people would be upset, though. For example, if we look at on Tuesday night's public hearing, the redevelopment at 815, so there's like 20 plus renters there paying much more affordable rates, and then they're going to get displaced for this new Rental 100 project. So I understand what you're saying, like this is it's adding more units to the rental market, but what do we do right now for those people?
No, I mean, I'm a renter. Like I said, I'm a lifelong renter. I live in an older building. So, I have to deal with these pressures myself. And, most of the people that I know and hang around with are renters as well. And, some of them can't afford, used to be able to live in Vancouver and have had to move further out. So we're in a crappy situation like that. And that's why I, have, spent time thinking and working on this, because we're in a crappy situation that's, the product of 40 years, 30 to 40 years of terrible housing policy and basically giving no regard for renters and rental housing and focusing all on home ownership, and also the federal withdrawal and the provincial withdrawal from funding, social housing over those decades as well. So we're in a terrible, terrible situation, and there are no easy solutions to it, and especially at the level of city governments that have a lot less revenue and fewer powers than those senior governments. So, yeah, we're in a crappy situation, and there aren't going to be any easy solutions. And so, yes, what do we do for the people that are displaced? Well, that's why the city of Vancouver has, a policy that, has been, again, a leading policy in the region in terms of, when redevelopment happens, in terms of compensating and, offering some assistance and to existing renters. And then, that policy has been expanded a couple times and reviewed a couple times. It's currently being expanded and reviewed. That was started under the previous council to review that in terms of the amount of compensation and what kind of rents that people can return at. So
Right.
if we can expand that, that's great. But again, the most of those levers are not within city control. That's mostly about the Residential Tenancy Act.
Right, but so right now, if like under Rental 100, we're not building enough rental, so the vacancy rate is going up slightly, and overall the cost of renting each year is going up quite a bit, or more than the vacancy rate is rising. So right now, like if we keep things as they are and are only incentivizing the same amount of rental that we're building right now, then aren't we like just going to see rents keep going up, the average rent keep going up in Vancouver? Like, don't you think there needs to be drastic action taken to increase rental building?
Don't I think that? Of course I think that. That's what
But so,
what I spend a
yeah,
good
sorry.
chunk
So
of
I
my time.
like you have been saying that, but what I mean is that if we don't make that change and Rental 100 just stays as it is, and like the amount of purpose-built rental stock being built remains as it is, like, do you still think this is better than having an alternative program or no Rental 100?
Well, first of all, we've got something that's helping, so don't abolish it. If what you mean by helping
Yeah.
is in terms of improving the program, is changing it in a way that increases the amount of rental that's built, of course, yes, let's do that. But I mean, it's not only Rental 100. It is also about the amount of land that's available to build multifamily housing on,
Right.
and rental housing being a subset of that. So we definitely need land use and zoning changes.
Sorry, I guess I just wanted to like, I'm not
Okay.
making myself very clear. So if the average price of renting in Vancouver is going up every year with this program in place, like, do you not see that as a problem?
I see it as a problem that rents are increasing so fast, and I see that mainly the reason that rents are increasing so fast, mainly as a function of scarcity.
Okay.
Of rental housing. So, what would help the most to moderate rents is if we had an adequate amount of rental housing, which is we need a lot more before
Right.
we're going to be able to, touch that, because again, we have such a backlog.
But
So
yeah,
of
and I
course-
understand that. But then, so
Okay.
if like the amount of vacancy, so we added all this new rental stock in the past few years, in part because of the Rental 100 program, and the vacancy rate dropped a little bit, but the overall cost of the average rent went up by like 6.2%. So basically, like what you're saying, if we need to add so much more to the market that it actually increases the vacancy rate to a healthy percent, like 3% or something, and then we start to see prices drop, it just seems like that's not going to happen. We'd have to add so much rental, and like you're saying, we have limited land. Like, do you think we're going to get to that point?
I think it's going to take years to get to that point, because it took us, it took us a long time to get into this, to get to it being this bad. It's been this bad for a long time. We have a huge backlog. So, yeah, it is going to take a long time, and that's why we need, to greatly expand the area where we can build rental housing. Am I not understanding or getting? I do think that we need to improve the program.
Yeah.
But, if some people's idea of quote improving the program is making it so that it's less appealing for developers to build, that's not improving the program, and that's not going to create more rental housing. And the more scarce rental housing is, the more expensive it's going to be. So that's what I got from listening to your interview with Councillor Carr. Is her idea of what improving the program is is, to make the rents that can be charged lower. And I don't think that's going to work.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand, and I'm understanding, I guess, from the opposite perspective. I guess folks who want to see the rates of rent charged under Rental 100 drop to be more affordable, I guess and if that no longer becomes profitable to developers, then we're relying on government to build housing. And so I guess that's sort of the plan, is that we would be getting funding from somewhere to build housing through the government.
Well, I would love that. I mean, who wouldn't love that? Everybody would love that if there was a lot more money available from, a combination of the provincial and federal government. Please bring that on. People have been asking that for a really long time, and certainly have had a lot more investment from this provincial government, and apparently we're getting some more from the federal government too. That seems a little bit less clear in terms of when that money is actually going to be available, but this provincial government has definitely stepped up its funding, and I applaud them for that. But it's not nearly enough.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't want to say it's only a drop in the bucket, but it's, considering the backlog that we had, and under the Liberals for 16 years, sure, they did a bit of funding, but they basically withdrew from that and were only willing to fund sort of the hardest to house, sort of the very bottom end of the far end of the housing spectrum, right, where the need is a lot greater than that and a lot wider than that. So I'm not it doesn't seem like the amount of funding that we need to address our rental housing is available. So I would love that if that was changed, but I'm not prepared to just sit around and wait for that to happen, and not say that we shouldn't try some other things while we're hoping for that to happen, because that's been going on for a long time. And and I think that's why some local governments finally somewhat reluctantly stepped into the breach, into that gap, because it's like, well, we can't just sit here and lobby and really not get anything that's close to what we need. We have to figure something out. We don't think this is really our job, but we can't just stand here. That's the approach that Vancouver took. Burnaby, took a different approach. Where would you rather be a renter? I'd rather be a renter in Vancouver than in Burnaby. Thanks very much.
Oh yeah. How about in New West?
New West, I think, is also a leader in the region for their housing policy.
They've
also the city of North Van too.
Well, in New West, they've advocated that the provincial government implement vacancy control, and I'm wondering if you think vacancy control is a good idea.
Yeah, I haven't followed the New West developments as closely as that. Is that really what they're saying there?
They recently passed a motion that basically makes it a lot harder for landlords to rent evict folks and fines them. But previous to that, they had lobbied the provincial government for vacancy control, so tying rent to the unit rather than the person. And this is seen as by groups like the Vancouver Tenants Union as a really important renter rights. Sorry, I'm losing my words. It's seen as a really important way to have rent control. It's like a form of rent control, but it's kind of the most important in allowing people to live in affordable suites. Do you support vacancy control?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
Because same idea. It's like it de-incentivizes the building of rental stock.
We have to deal with the realities that we're in. We may not like the fact that we're, living in a market-based society, but our policies have to deal with the fact that is the current reality. And to me, what's more important to me than making sort of an ideological point about what should be the case is getting people housed and helping people now, because again, housing should be a right, and if you don't have adequate housing, that has all sorts of other terrible ramifications for your life prospects and your health. So I care about getting people housed first, like what's going to work, to get people housed, rather than saying this is the way it should be.
But if housing should be a right, then how can we rely on the market to provide that? Like, we can't really, can we? Because right
I'm
now,
not, I'm not advocating that we do whatsoever. Like I said, I would, I support governments and with my votes and with my volunteer efforts and with my voice, I support governments at all three levels that, at least give some lip service to the idea that housing is a right and run on policies that suggest that and say that they will fund housing. That's, I'm completely in alignment with that. I don't believe the market can solve it, but I do think that we are living in a market economy, and so our policies have to address current realities while we also, say, this is our ultimate goal, but what do we do to house people now, rather than, saying, if something's not perfectly in alignment with my ideology or my goals, then it's no good, it's worthless. I'm not in favor of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm in favor of let's make as many improvements as we can. Right now, let's work towards, towards our ultimate goal, but we need to help people now.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for answering my questions, Karen.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
It was good to get your perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Okay. That was extremely painful for me to listen to, because it was unedited. And I sound a lot smarter when I edit my interviews. So this is Alex, by the way. You're listening to CITR 101.9 FM. This is Democracy Watch.
And we are dropping all of our trade secrets today.
Yeah.
You're never going to look at our show the same way again.
Yeah, that was an interview with Karen Sawatsky, and she spoke with me about why she is in favor of Rental 100. So we're going to have like a really much nicer version of this story on Seeking Office. So be sure to download that later. But now we're going to go to another unedited interview. And this one is with Sarah Sagai, who is the a steering committee member with the Vancouver Tenants Union. And Sarah is critical of Rental 100. So let's take a listen to what she has to say. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah. This is Alex from CITR calling.
Hi, Alex. How
Hey.
are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
No problem.
Again.
For your great show and great journalism.
Thank you. Could you start out by telling our listeners who you are and, how you're connected with renters' rights in Vancouver?
Sure. So my name is Sarah Sagai. I'm on the steering committee of Vancouver Tenants Union. We do tenant organizing and advocacy for tenants who are usually under threat of demo evictions or reno evictions or evictions in general. And we do building-based organizing and neighborhood-based organizing, and we try to be proactive in getting into buildings before people receive evictions, because it's more effective to organize people before they're in a critical situation. And we also try to advocate for policy changes, because this is a systemic problem. It's not something that can be solved case by case. So we don't just, we're also a volunteer-led organization, so we can't just provide service on a voluntary basis. That's why we need to basically pressure various levels of government in order to act and stop the crisis that renters, especially low-income renters, are facing in the city.
Thanks. Can you tell me just briefly why you oppose Rental 100?
Sure. So Rental 100 is an interesting program. It's something that's been in effect at the City of Vancouver for the last 10 years. There was another program before that was called Short-Term Incentive for Rentals, something like that, STIR. And the idea of that is that the city will subsidize construction of rentals on the on the premise that just building rentals will solve or have a major positive impact on the housing crisis. The problem here is not building rentals. I'm not opposed to building rentals. I'm opposed to the fact that these new rentals are subsidized by public money without providing the houses that most renters need.
Right.
So the starting rents in these buildings are often for between $1,400 to $1,600 for a studio, and then keep going up from there. And it's also important to keep in mind that these are just the starting rents, and because we don't have rent control tied to the units in this province, we unfortunately, when the first tenant moves out, the rents can go even further up.
Right.
So this is a program that's creating luxury rentals essentially, and then there's other problems with the way it usually in practice, the way the developments under this program are sort of implemented is that usually they end up going on top of existing rentals. So we have a situation where existing, usually super affordable rentals are being destroyed in order to make room for luxury rentals.
Right. You're referring to at 815 Commercial Drive, for example.
815, yes.
Yeah.
815 Commercial Drive is one of them. There was another case in January, about a month ago, which was on East Hastings, in Hastings Sunrise. It was a similar situation that there are long-term tenants in the building, and for that reason, they pay low rents. And then the owner comes in and they realize that it's possible to use this program to subsidize their construction of rentals, and they sort of use that as an excuse to tear down the building and get rid of long-term tenants and start charging much higher rents.
Right. And so, like, on that topic, during Tuesday's public hearing over the redevelopment at 815 Commercial Drive, Councillor Melissa DeGenova said that there are some people in the city who are overhoused, meaning they're people who can afford to pay more than they do for housing. And so by having housing rental developments like this one at 815 Commercial Drive, folks who can pay more will move into it. That's the idea, I guess, would move into it. And where they left, that rental stock would be freed up for people who are lower income. What do you think of that?
Right. So this is a myth, essentially. I have a lot to say on that. I'll try to keep it short. Basically, there's a theory. It's an old theory. It's a right-wing theory that was developed in the 60s and the 70s. It's called filtering theory. It's sort of the opposite of trickle-down economics. It's trickle-up. This idea that if you build luxury rentals, the people who are living in the affordable rentals, they'll move up to the new ones, and they'll free up the space for the lower income people. In reality, first of all, this is misunderstanding the rental crisis. The rental crisis is not the problem. There is not that there isn't enough, or there's a large portion of affordable rentals occupied by richer people. That's not the problem we're having right now. The problem we have is that we don't have enough low rent buildings. That's the problem. But even let's assume there is a portion of renters who make more money and can afford to pay higher rents than they currently do. If these people are not going to move out to higher rent situation. They're just not going to, like most people are not going to do that, because that doesn't make logical sense. If you have good rent, you usually stay there. Let's say some people choose to move to a nicer place because they can afford it. What happens is that when these people move out, because we don't have vacancy control, the landlord can jack up the rent in the old place, and then they come to the same level as the new constructions. So this is the new construction setting the standard for everything and pushing up the definition of affordable and actually, in a way, kind of eradicating the existing affordability by, because we don't have vacancy control, by sort of setting the standard at a much higher level. So the problem here, again, is not that, I think Councillor DeGenova was saying new buildings are going to be affordable in 50 years' time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is again, this is a myth. The building that is being torn down right now, or was going through rezoning on Tuesday, the rent in the current building is actually the same as the new one that was proposed. The reason for that is because the landlord managed to get rid of long-term tenants about 2 years ago, and they doubled the rent.
Mm-hmm.
So situation like this, that there's no rent control between tenancies, there's no difference if the building is old or new.
Right.
There's no difference between who rents it. If they're a higher income or lower income, the landlord can basically just ask the market price.
Right. And so, but we have very, very low vacancy rates in the city for renters. So, we do need more rental stock. And yeah, in this case, people are being displaced at 815 Commercial Drive. But say it was, say it's a different development where people aren't being displaced. And I know that you've criticized the rates that Rental 100 sets because they are more expensive than the average Vancouverite can pay. But what a critic might say to that is that if developers don't set the rates, the rental rates that high, then they won't be able to make enough profit to make the development affordable. So what do you say to that?
I think this isn't a good city policy. So look at the number of units that have been constructed under this program over the last whatever number of years that it's been active. So first of all, this is a very expensive way of constructing rentals from the city's point of view, because they're foregoing between $500,000 to $1 million in tax revenue per development.
Right, by waiving the DCL costs, right?
Yeah, the DCL waivers, exactly. Yeah. And the result of it is not that many rental units anyway, because the city does not have it in its capacity to build mass numbers of rentals.
Yeah.
So the effect, so let's say the goal is to increase the vacancy rate. The effect under this program is still going to be very, very, very marginal, and it's not going to solve the problem. And it's actually a very expensive way of subsidizing rental construction. And on top of that, it's not constructing for the people who need it right now. It's building for people who may move out of their lower rent or may not. It's constructing for people, essentially, like according to the definition of the program, it's building rentals for people who want to own homes, but they can't, so they choose to rent for now.
But so then why get rid of Rental 100? Why not add to it? Like, if it can't sufficiently solve the problem, do you think it's making it worse?
I think it's using available funds at the city level, available incentives, available tools to basically subsidize private profit. And the city doesn't need to do that. I think the city needs to protect the lower income people. It needs to build for lower income people. The city could partner up with nonprofits instead of focusing on building for profit. That's one solution. There's other things. So I think Rental 100, I'm not saying rental should be constructed or shouldn't be constructed. I think the market can do its own thing when it comes to for-profit. But the government's programs and subsidies should be used to protect lower income people and to build however they can for lower income people who need it right now. And I think, and I don't think I ever said that we should get rid of Rental 100 or whatever. Okay. I just think that I think the definition of affordability needs to be fixed, and that's the first step. And I think Councillor Carr's motion to that end that came to Council yesterday is a very effective first step. And I also think that if a rental is being subsidized by the city, there needs to be actual affordability measures in place. One of them is actually affordable starting rents. The second step is to tie rents to the unit.
Right.
And I think the city. So the problem with Rental 100 is that there is no plan for long-term sort of affordability in these buildings. It's just assumed that if we build now, they're going to be affordable at some point. But there are ways that you could fix that potentially. And I'm not a policy expert here. I'm not a planner. But I'm sure if the city had the will to bring back the tax revenue that's lost, actually work toward the affordability that we need, I'm sure the developers could be encouraged to forego more of their profit, give back to the city, and in the long run create the affordability that we need. It's just that the city needs to ask. And if we keep sitting back and saying, "Oh, they won't build if we don't basically give up all of the taxes," and this is like neoliberalism. This is what we've been dealing with for the last 40 years. That it's tax cuts for the rich.
Right.
It's
So
trickle down economics.
Right.
If we let the free market take over, we will eventually get something for the poor people. And it's been failing for the last 40 years. There's just no evidence that theory works.
right. I guess some folks on the other side would also say, though, Rental 100 isn't the free market. It is an incentive program. So it is, it is setting some rules slightly different than the market. But also, so just so I understand you correctly, you're saying that if instead the local municipal government in Vancouver took the DCL fees that they are waiving under Rental 100 and put, like, instead of cutting those fees that would be going into their revenue, instead, if they built truly affordable rental with nonprofits, you think like that would cost the city the same amount, or would they still have to get additional funds from, say, the provincial government to build that affordable stock?
I mean, if you can build rentals by waiving DCLs and by giving density bonuses, et cetera, with the for-profit sector, you can definitely get better results if you work with nonprofit sector, don't you think? Like, because you're taking the profit out of the equation. Mm-hmm. It just rational that if you work with nonprofit sector, you could make probably a lot more affordable homes. There's a person speaking in favor of Councillor Carr's motion last night at the City Hall with Brightside Community Homes, which is a nonprofit housing organization, and she was saying that their average rent in all of the buildings that they own, and they own a lot, maybe a few dozens of buildings across the city, the average rent is $650, if I remember correctly. Mm. And the way they are able to do that is because they've been around for a long time and they've paid off their mortgage, and essentially they're able to just provide these low rents to people, and they have a mandate to house seniors and people with disability. So if that's possible, then why isn't the city working with the nonprofit sector to create that kind of a situation in 50 years' time? Because if you're thinking long term, then you actually need to have a plan for long term. Building market, we have a lot of buildings that were built 50 years ago, and they're not affordable today. Mm-hmm. So you can't. This is my problem, that you can't just work off of a myth that hasn't been working. There's no evidence that it will work. The city needs to do more. It needs to have a better plan. If the goal is to create long-term affordability, you need to show that what you're doing is actually going to work in 50 years' time.
Right.
But if the plan is to do short affordability, then obviously you need to do other things. Maybe also work with nonprofits to create or build social housing, or spend the tax revenues that you're foregoing could be spent building modular homes, or it could be spent on anything, that would address the crisis right now.
Well, why do you think the city of Vancouver, I mean, this Rental 100 was in place in 2012, and as you said before, it was STIR in 2009 it began. So if this rental incentive program is so flawed and is not producing affordable housing, why do you think the city set it up this way instead of incentivizing actually like welfare rate rental stock?
Because we had a Vision Vancouver majority government for the last 10 years. If you actually look at the history of where this program came from, there was a lot of opposition to the original STIR program, and then there was opposition again when they started Rental 100. But as we know, the way things were with the Vision Council, because they had majority, they just rammed things through, and they didn't listen to the community. So anyone who does that research, they can see that this wasn't a popular program when it was created, and it's been around for 10 years. So where's the results that we've been promised? It has not helped ease the pressure on renters in the last 10 years. I don't think so. I don't know. I can't see the results. And there's a lot of articles actually coming out that shows supply is not going to fix the housing crisis. Fundamentally, the problem with this kind of programs is that it assumes that more supply of any kind will help fix the market. And really the problem is that they're trying to fix the market. But so at Vancouver Tenants Union, we operate from the assumption that market is broken, we can't fix it. And it shouldn't be the government's job to fix the market. It should be the government's job to protect the people who the market can't and won't serve.
Right.
So that requires an ideological reorientation to kind of wean off of these neoliberal policies that have been in effect the last 40 years in North America broadly, and kind of refocus on people who need government subsidies and government protection right now.
Right. So I just have one final question. So as you know, Councillor Carr has submitted a motion to review the city's housing programs, which includes Rental 100. What are you hoping will come from that?
I think that's a very positive motion. I support that. I spoke in support of it last night. I hope that they will actually put some substance into the definition of affordability. Currently in Rental 100, I think it's defined, affordable rents are defined as with a combination of comparison to the cost to own in a neighborhood. So if it's lower than the cost to own or buy a condo in a neighborhood, it's assumed to be affordable, and comparison with where the median rents in the neighborhood are. It might be a little more complicated than that, but essentially they call it affordable if it costs less to rent than to own, and that's a very wide window, enough to be completely meaningless. So bringing that definition back to the CMHC definition, which is 30% of the person's income, I think is a very important first step. And if we can't achieve that kind of affordability under existing programs, then we need to think about kind of more creatively about how to create a situation where we will be able to deliver this kind of affordability. If that means partnering up with nonprofits instead of for-profits, if that means going more to the federal and provincial governments and pressuring for real investment in housing. Justin Trudeau just announced $10 million for housing in Vancouver. That's really despicable. That's just outrageous. It's such a small amount of money that to think that they even announced that, it's kind of funny. It sounded like a joke, really. We need a lot more. We need to build 10,000 units of social housing every year in BC in order to solve the housing crisis. So,
that's a lot. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Sarah.
No problem. Thanks so much for your questions.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. All right. You're listening to Democracy Watch on CITR 101.9 FM. We just heard an interview with Sarah Sagai of the Vancouver Tenants Union, and before that, an interview I did with Karen Sawatsky, who is a former member of a Vancouver Renter Advisory Committee for the city. They were speaking on the topic of Rental 100, Vancouver's primary rental development incentive program. The interviews were unedited, so that was hard for me to hear, but I hope they were okay. They're going to be edited, and we're going to put out a polished and moving and informative podcast episode of Seeking Office tonight, probably.
It's going to be a long night. This is actually, the whole unedited interview thing is largely an exercise in, I guess, getting our listeners to appreciate how much work goes into the exceptional quality journalism that we produce every week here at Democracy Watch.
Yeah.
These are the raw materials, and we spin them into journalistic gold week after week. That's us.
Well,
spinning
not
away.
so much spin it into journalistic gold, but spin it into like moderately more palatable, considerably more palatable storytelling.
I mean, gold's not that palatable, I imagine.
I mean,
it's shiny.
well, all right. Well, my name's Alex DeBoer.
My name is Zoe Power.
Thanks for listening.
Up next is No Dead Air.
We think, yeah.
Oh, maybe.
He's supposed to be here. No Dead Air guy. I always forget his name. It's been like 2 years. Okay, thank you for listening. Tune in next week at 5. Download our podcast, Seeking Office. Have a great night. See you later. Goodbye.
Bye.